This is the story of war's strangest battle. In 1941, Australians and New Zealanders came together briefly to fight in a second Anzac Corps. They fought an enemy who dropped from the sky in the only successful parachute invasion in history. This is the epic story of Greece and Crete. Early in 1941, our ally Greece, having thrown back an Italian invasion from Albania, was threatened, as was Yugoslavia, with an attack by the Germans from the north. The British position in the Middle East was soon to be menaced by German infiltration of Syria and by the first German thrust into the desert by Rommel. But to help our only surviving ally, it was decided to send the 6th Australian Division and the New Zealanders to Greece. The Australian cruiser Perth joined with other warships and merchantmen to ferry the troops from Egypt to Greece. The expeditionary force was pitifully small for its task. To oppose 27 German divisions, 7 of them armored, there were only the 6th Australian Division, the New Zealand Division, and 24,000 British troops, mainly base and administrative units. The only tanks they had were those of one solitary British armored brigade. The Greek army, already engaged against a far stronger Italian army in Albania, could provide only 6 weak divisions to meet the new enemy. To General Maitland-Wilson, the commander-in-chief, to General Blamey, the Australian commander, and to General Freiberg, who led the New Zealanders, the defense of Greece seemed a hopeless undertaking. But honor demanded that the British Commonwealth's only remaining ally should not be left alone to face the gathering storm. The Italian Navy sallied out to attack the convoys. But at the Battle of Matapan on March the 28th, the Mediterranean fleet, with Perth and HMAS Stuart well to the fore, whipped the Italians so soundly that they did not venture out again. The Piraeus, port of Athens, was the gateway to Greece to the young Australians of the 6th Division. To the New South Welshmen, it seemed strangely like home. The hard light, the grey-green trees, the clear water. They went ashore with excitement and eagerness, glad to be quit of the harsh desert and the dust and the sand. There was another thing they noted with pleasure as the crowded lorries bore them to their camps. Here in Greece, their welcome was sincere and warm. The New Zealanders were given the same generous reception. Men and women lined the streets to clap and cheer them. Thumbs up for good luck. They marched with an air, these young warriors from 10,000 miles away, and the Greeks hailed them with relief and gratitude. Behind an Australian Bren gun carrier marched a column of British troops, reminder to the Greeks of times before when Britain had stood their friend against tyranny. They had never doubted that Britain would answer their call for help once more. This was Greece, cradle of Western civilization, birthplace of the democracy for which they had come to fight. Every pillar and stone of the Parthenon was heavy with history. Athens, a word to conjure with. The Australians didn't take long to chum up with the kilted Evzones, the elite mountain troops of the Greek army. There was a ready comradeship between the Australian and Greek fighting men. Language was a problem. But a drink's a drink in any language, even if it's called ouzo. These were the soldiers of Greece who first humbled Mussolini's pride. They marched past their king. The principal German thrust came through Yugoslavia. The Australians' main task was to hold the line of the Aliakman River with a Greek army on the left and the New Zealanders round Mount Olympus on the right. General Wilson's headquarters was at Ellison. The campaign developed as a series of desperate rearguard actions back to Athens and the coast. On April the 6th, the Germans struck into Greece. By April the 11th, the Australians were in action. The Germans were in overwhelming strength. Now the New Zealanders had their baptism of fire. Blitzkrieg tactics forced the heavily outnumbered defenders to fall back, fighting desperately. On April the 12th, as the battle raged, General Blamey, a veteran of the Gallipoli landing 26 years before, issued his historic order creating the Anzac Corps. Even retreat could not quench the Anzac spirits. There were very few British tanks left now, and enemy pressure was increasing. German artillery harassed the retreating Greek and Anzac columns. The tough peasant soldiers of Greece fought stubbornly and well, but mules were a poor substitute for trucks. Fighting in the shadow of Mount Olympus, they found that courage alone was not enough. The withdrawal continued as rear guards, fighting bitterly, tried to slow down the enemy advance. Troops had to be constantly on the alert for attack from the air, for the German Air Force had complete mastery of the skies of Greece. The German pilots knew that heavy traffic passed through this village. But bombs or no bombs, the Australian artillerymen were determined to save their guns. In Greece, as in other countries of Europe on which the mailed fist of Germany had fallen, the people learned what total war meant. A few German planes were shot down, but to the simple peasants of Ellison, this was cold comfort for the loss of their homes. This was a familiar sight to anyone who served in Greece. The young men were all at the front, so to the sturdy peasant women fell the task of keeping the roads open. Down the roads, past the wrecked villages, across the mountain streams, the retreat went on. When the last troops had crossed, the bridges were blown up to delay the enemy. There were sharp encounters, ambushes, heroic stands, but in overwhelming strength the Germans battered their way towards Athens. A few hours ago they had homes and possessions. Now they were refugees with nothing. And now for the Anzacs, it was approaching the end. The orders for evacuation had been issued. The people of Greece, the lights of liberty were going out. The long night of brutal tyranny lay ahead. There was only room for soldiers on the ships. Cars and trucks were smashed to make them useless to the enemy. But for the simple people of the Greek countryside, there was no evacuation. The Germans could claim another victory. They had destroyed the last outpost of freedom on the mainland of Europe. The Anzac Corps' successful fighting withdrawal of 300 miles was a greater military achievement. Ships of the Royal Navy, the RAN, and the Merchant Navy evacuated 50,000 troops from Athens and small ports along the coast. Some to Crete and some direct to Alexandria. Operation Demon, the Navy called the evacuation of Greece. Warships and British and Dutch merchantmen took fearful risks to rescue the troops and suffered severe losses. But they saved a great part of the expeditionary force to fight again another day. Again, they counted themselves lucky to be alive and at liberty. For the moment, that was all that mattered. The ill-fated expedition had suffered nearly 15,000 casualties. The 6th Australian Division lost 320 men killed, 500 wounded, and 2,000 taken prisoner. The German casualties were 1,200 killed, 4,000 wounded, and 350 missing. For weeks after Operation Demon ended, groups of determined soldiers made their adventurous way to safety in little boats with the selfless aid of Greek civilians. The men of the Anzac Corps, like their fathers at Gallipoli, had failed to win victory, but their failure, too, had been a glorious one. Back in Germany, picked parachute regiments were training for the most daring airborne operation ever conceived. It was the German solution to the problem of seizing the island of Crete from an enemy commanding the seas. Never had such an operation been attempted before. Lance Corporal Max Schmeling, German boxing champion, was a gift to the German propaganda services. They trained hard. The task ahead of them was formidable and vitally important. A German airborne force of 23,000 was to be pitted against a garrison of British, Anzacs, and Greeks numbering 43,000. True, the garrison was disorganized, battle-weary, and ill-equipped, but the odds still looked dangerous. We have no traditions yet, the German commanders told the paratroopers. We must create traditions. They were young, eager, fanatical, and trained to a hair. All they wanted was the chance to prove themselves. That chance was close at hand. Lance Corporal Max Schmeling did his best to look like a Nordic Aryan hero. Meanwhile, to gain as much knowledge of Crete and its defenses as possible, Crete, fabled home of the Minotaur, is 160 miles long, rugged and mountainous, with high peaks and few harbors. With targets located, German Dorniers and Heinkels joined the Stukas in bombing attacks to clear the way for the airborne invasion. From dawn to dusk, the German planes ranged the skies above Crete. By May 19th, only half a dozen British aircraft remained on the island. The rest had been shot down or destroyed on the ground. On that day, the surviving RAF planes were withdrawn to Egypt. The way was clear for the German airborne assault. From Berlin, Lord Haw-Haw, the British traitor, labeled Crete the Island of Doom. He threatened, for every blade of grass, a bullet, for every olive tree, a bomb. Below, on the island, General Freiberg's British, Australian, New Zealand, and Greek garrison, desperately short of equipment, strove to prepare defenses. Germany had swallowed up Greece. Now followed the Battle of Crete. Here, the ill-armed defenders had three main tasks: to hold the three vital airfields. Malemi, the airfield for Suda Bay and the Cretan capital, Chania. Retimo, and Heraklion. Kurt Student, who commanded the German airborne troops, planned to use 80 towed gliders and 700 Junkers transports, supported by 430 dive bombers. 10,000 parachutists were to be dropped. 3 attempts to land seaborne troops were smashed by the Navy, including HMAS Perth, and 5,000 Germans drowned. Now, everything depended on the airborne forces. On May the 20th, the first full-scale paratroop invasion in history began. It was a revolution in warfare. Like blossoms shaken from a tree, thousands of parachutes, white, red, yellow, green, and black, floated down on Crete. The colored chutes carried arms, ammunition, medical supplies, and food. Fighting men swayed in the cords of the white chutes. Hundreds of parachutists died in the air as the defenders' fire ripped into them. Hundreds more were bayoneted on the ground as they struggled to release their harness. But thousands landed safely and went into action. In desperate haste, they snatched up their weapons. No time to pause, no time to count the odds. They were in battle the moment they hit the ground. The defenders struck back hard. Low-flying German bombers sought targets. There was fierce and bloody hand-to-hand fighting. More and more German reinforcements were landing, and the Australians suffered heavy casualties. Time and again, the Australians went in with a bayonet. In Cretan towns and villages, there was savage street fighting. Hemmed in, out of ammunition, these Australians were captured. Regardless of appalling losses in men and aircraft, German reinforcements still poured in. Short of weapons and supplies, the defenders were forced to give up the fight. The fighting in Crete was over in 12 days. The Malemi forces fell back, fighting savagely to Sfakia. After a gallant stand, the Heraklion force was embarked from Heraklion. At Retimo, which held out the longest, one Australian battalion surrendered, the other dispersed to the hills. The Germans knew that a mass evacuation of the defenders would be attempted by the Navy and threw in every plane they had to smash it. They sank 3 British cruisers, 6 destroyers, and 315,000 tons of merchant shipping. 2 battleships, an aircraft carrier, 2 cruisers, and 2 destroyers were damaged beyond repair. Admiral Cunningham called it a disastrous period in our naval history. Despite its crippling losses, the Navy brought 16,500 soldiers off Crete. 2,000 naval men gave their lives in this heroic effort, in which the Australian ships Perth, Stuart, Nizam, and Napier played a gallant part. The men of Crete were weary, but not dispirited. 4,000 of them had been killed or wounded, and 16,000 captured. But Crete had cost the Germans 9,000 dead, 220 craft destroyed. The disastrous German losses saved Cyprus and Malta, prevented the reinforcement of Syria and the Iraqi rebels, and blunted the German threat in the Mediterranean. Hitler's invasion of Russia was delayed by 4 weeks, and the German army was forced to fight a winter campaign in Russia for which it was totally unprepared. This, in the long run, was probably the most important result of the campaigns in Greece and Crete. The men of the 6th Australian Division and their New Zealand comrades had won great honour and forged between their countries and Greece an imperishable bond of friendship. The new Anzac Corps stood worthily beside the old.